Thank you, Eric. Eric obviously didn't realize these sessions are being recorded initially. The good news for me is because they're being recorded, when I do ask for a raise, which I'm probably going to be doing shortly, I'll play that back to Eric and Mason. Remind them of the things he said. Yeah, hey, I'm good at that. Second thing is, I hate being behind a podium, but because we're recording, I need to be. So if I start walking away from the mic, somebody give me a dirty look. Yeah, I know, but we want that for you guys for questions. So thank you. We'll manage. So the second thing I want to mention is Eric mentioned that my trade, by background, is human resources, is HR. Normally, if you put more than 3 people in a room, there's at least one HR hater. So if you think part of the problem with why we have this gap in information security between our demand for talent, qualified talent, and our supply of qualified talent, if you think HR has responsibility for part of that, A, I agree. It's why I'm doing this, because I believe that deeply. And B, if you want to come up and kick me in the shins afterwards, I'm kind of used to that, so feel free to do that. But not too hard, because I have to fly to San Francisco tonight for another one of these tomorrow. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of VetSuccess, which is what we're going to spend most of our time talking about this morning, I want to give you a little bit of context for what I think and what the people at SANS think and what some of our colleagues think is going on in the war for cyber talent and why we think we are where we are. Now, I've been around so long that I actually have been in the field before the term war for talent was coined by McKinsey in the 80s. So I've been through at least a dozen wars for talent. I've been through a war for talent when we couldn't find electrical engineers. I've been through a war for talent when we couldn't find qualified IT people. I've been through a war for talent when we couldn't find people with international business experience. So that's not new to me. But I think there are 3 things that are really, really different about this war for talent with cybersecurity than anything I've ever seen in my career. And that's a long career. The first is it happened faster. Now, what I mean by that is from the perspective of the layperson, not from the perspective of any of you are cyber warriors. If any of you are deep in cyber, you probably thought it took those of us who are not in it a long time to wake up to what you already knew, what you've known all along. But if you look at it from our perspective, information security, particularly in the world I come from, which is large Fortune 500 companies, it was a backroom niche. In fact, it was the guy or girl you didn't let out of the back room who reported 16 layers deep in the IT organization. And you had Joe, and Joe always took care of everything. And Joe was the guy who kept you out of trouble. And we've gone from Joe in the back corner less than 10 years ago, my view, maybe 10-ish, to now, last year, the National Association of Corporate Directors. That is the umbrella group that is responsible for training board members of public companies. The NACD listed the single most important business issue that keeps their board members up at night was cybersecurity. That's right. So in a space of less than 10 years, from our perspective, we've gone from Joe in the corner to the biggest business problem that every company faces, or every organization, whether they're a nonprofit, a company, a government entity. Big, big deal. So what happens when you go from a situation where you got Joe in the corner to the biggest business problem in less than 10 years? You have a supply-demand imbalance. So that's why we're sitting here today, or you're sitting here, I'm standing here, talking about this because of that issue. That's number one. The second issue is it's way more global. Now, I can tell you from every other war for talent I've been involved in, and I've been involved in a bunch of them, they tend to be more regionally focused. So while we might have had trouble getting electrical engineers in the late 70s, early 80s, some other part of the world was doing okay with that. This is really global. And unfortunately, as every one of you in this room knows, the solutions that the bad guys are using to address this are very different than the solutions we can use. We can't go out and find 12-year-olds that we think are going to be really talented in this area and tell them this is what you're going to do for the next 20 years. Honestly, with a 5-year-old granddaughter, some days I wish we could, because it's scary. And the bad guys are doing a lot of things that are really, really scary, and our tools at our toolkit are not nearly as comprehensive as ours. Those are the prices we pay for living in a democracy. But nonetheless, it's way more global. But the third difference between this war for talent and any other one I've ever been involved in is the most important, and that is the stakes are way higher. You know, if we didn't have an electrical engineer to run one of our mills at Alcoa when Eric and I worked there, back 100 years ago, maybe the mill didn't run, and maybe it cost us money, but we eventually got the mill to run. If we don't get this right, I worry about the world my granddaughter's going to grow up in. I worry a lot about it. So the stakes of doing this right are really, really way, way more important than anything I've ever been involved in talent in almost 40 years of doing this for a living. So if you already work in cyber, let me just pause and say thank you. If you're contemplating going in this field, I encourage it highly. I'm going to try to spend the next 40 or 50 minutes convincing you why you should. If you have friends who are thinking about it, please convince them they should. Because what you're doing is really, really important. And don't let anybody ever tell you it's not. It is mission critical. Whether you're working for the DOD or whether you're working for JP Morgan Chase, I don't care. It's mission critical. So those are three things that are really, really different. Okay? So we spent a lot of time framing up how we think about this issue. In this little chart that you have in front of you, I'm going to kind of go around the circle and talk a little bit about each of the four quadrants of this chart. And in the green, I don't know if it's green up in your, yep, it's green up in your screen, more lime green than on mine, but that's okay. The green up in front of you, I think is changing, and I think it's a function of what industry vertical you're in. I think in some industry verticals, the C-suite is really starting to recognize this. Do you think the people on the board of directors at Target, how did the Target hack happen? Everybody know? How did it happen? HVAC system vendor. Everybody know that? I've told that story 100 times, and every time I tell it, at least one person goes, nah, that can't be. But that's how it happened. So I think you're starting to see a dawning awareness, but there are still a lot of verticals where people don't get it yet. And they will get it, and they'll get it because of a number of reasons, but one of the most important one is called IoT, the Internet of Things. I have a book I highly recommend if you want to really maybe get a little nervous about this area, but get a good sense of the area. It's called Future Crimes. It came out last year. I was listening to NPR driving someplace, and I heard the guy interviewed, and I thought, oh, that's a book I want to read, working with SANS now. And the story of the guy is he started out as a New York City police detective, and one day in the 80s, his boss said to him, hey, do you know how spell check works? And 30 years later, he retired as one of the top cyber cops at Interpol. And the book is scary. I mean, it really will get your attention. But he has a number of analogies that he uses about the Internet of Things. And one of the analogies he's used that I've used a bunch of times, his name is, I think, Mark Hellman or something. I want to give him attribution credit because I'm stealing shamelessly from him. But one of the things he says is if you think of today's Internet, which I think the Internet protocol today is IP 4.2, is that right? I think it is, 4 point something. Anyway, if you think about today's 4 point something, and you think of it as a physical object, it's the size of a golf ball. If you think about the Internet 6.0 when it gets fully implemented up the road and the Internet of Things is there, it's going to be the size of the sun. Everything will have an IP address. And when everything has an IP address, everything is hackable, including my refrigerator, which is not all that interesting, but maybe Eric's is, I don't know. So I do think you're seeing a lot of shift in the last 2 or 3 years around this. The yellow mustard colored box is the one we're going to spend most of our time today talking about. Anybody read the Cisco report? It says we have 1 million openings in this field. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure we won't someday have 1 million openings, but the best source I've seen, and I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years looking for sources of data. And Alan Paller, our founder, and I have talked about this extensively. And he agrees. The best source we've seen so far is something called the Burning Glass Report. If you haven't seen it, it's free. If you're interested in this field, go get it, download it. It doesn't cost you a nickel. And the Burning Glass Report, the last time it came out last year, said we had 240,000 openings. Now, that doesn't mean that we had 240,000 openings at any one point in time. It means over the course of the year, there were 240,000 postings that had some cyber information security keyword in them. And I'm going into all this gory detail because I think it's really important. If we're going to solve a problem, we really need to understand the problem. And so when you get these kind of wild numbers that get thrown around, I think it's really important to really dig into those numbers deeply and understand them. So at any point in time, posted jobs. Now, everybody knows not every job that gets filled gets posted, right? A lot of jobs get filled internally without ever being posted. But of posted positions that they could find in a public posting that were searchable by keyword, There were 240,000 the last time they did their work, which was the period of the year of 2014. That is growing 91% over 5 years. And every CISO I talk to and every senior person who thinks about this field believes that will continue in the next 5 years. The real question is, will automation ever get to the point where some of the lower level positions that are desperately needed to be filled right now begin to dry up a bit? And when I talk to people, I get mixed answers on that. But as far out as I can see, which is the next 3 to 5 years, it's not going to change. We're going to need more and more and more people because of IoT, because of all the things I talked about. And then threat proliferation, the blue quadrant. Interesting. I don't know if this quote is from Alan directly, but I know he's fond of saying something like this. There are two kinds of companies. Those are two kinds of organizations, because we're not just talking about companies here. We're talking about agencies. We're talking about nonprofits. Two kinds of organizations, those that have been hacked and those that just don't know it. So something to think about. Obviously, the cost of having that happen is huge. We did a little bit of research last year after the Target hack and tried to figure out the cost to Target and loss of revenue, not counting image or anything soft, but just loss of revenue, let alone firing a CEO who had been with the company over 30 years. And our math said it was north of $500 million. So big deal. And then lastly, skills mismatch, which is kind of the core area SANS has been involved in for almost 30 years. So one of the challenges, and I teach human resources strategy at Michigan State now and again, and when we want to change a curricula, one of our programs in our master's program, do you know how long it takes us to change a curricula? Anybody want to guess? 2 years, 3 years-ish. Some universities, it's even slower. How often do you think we review SANS courses? Quarterly in some cases, at least a couple times a year. So you have this challenge that we would love the universities to catch up with some of these challenges in terms of skills and development, but the speed at which they change, just by the nature of what they are, is a lot slower than the speed at which this field is changing. So if you think about my discipline, HR or accounting or engineering or a lot of disciplines that have been around a long time, there are well-established career paths. You know what a career looks like. There are well-established metrics for success. Everybody knows what a CPA is. I don't know that everybody knows what a holder of a GX cert is, which they all did. We'll try to help with that, but nonetheless, the point is you have a field that's changing very, very rapidly, and our traditional ways of training people for that field are not solving the problem. Hence, organizations like ours that are very dedicated to try to bring as many people in the field as we can. So that's a little bit of kind of overarching principles that we thought about when we created the cyber talent unit within SANS a little less than 2 years ago. This is what was on our mind as we thought about what we wanted to do. This is a systems approach. If I was having a conversation with you about a talent life cycle for general managers, for plant managers, for senior electrical engineers, a lot of what you see on this page would look very similar. This is a typical approach to trying to solve a supply-demand imbalance for talent. SANS is working in all four of these quadrants. We're going to spend most of our time today talking about the talent life cycle and inside of that, the VetSuccess program. But we're trying to think about all these areas because we think we need to address all these areas. And I would say to you, if your organization doesn't have a human capital strategy, forget about cyber, just a human capital strategy, that's an issue. You need to start with an overarching strategy, how you're dealing with this. You need to think about your culture of your organization and what works in your culture, and what works in your culture might not work in mine. And so what part of the challenge you have when you have a supply-demand imbalance is people try to approach it by buying the problem, or they try to approach it by throwing all the resources they can at it, and they waste a lot of time and energy because the things that work in one organization won't necessarily work in another. So you need to really be thoughtful about what's the strategy. I was give you an example because I like dealing in stories and examples. I was with some people from, and they told me it was okay to talk about this. I was with some people from Mayo Clinic. Anybody? I guess nobody here from Mayo Clinic. And they're having a problem in this area, like everybody. And they were talking about how difficult it is to attract people to Rochester, Minnesota. I'm from northern Michigan, but I get it. Some people don't want to live in Rochester. They were talking about the fact they don't pay bonuses. They were talking a lot of challenges, and I said, yeah, but what's the other side of that? There are people out there who get your mission. I mean, they have one of the most noble missions. I mean, their mission is, in my opinion, as noble as the mission of most of you guys in this room. It's a big deal what they do at Mayo Clinic. So they got to attract people who get that mission and want that mission because they can't afford to pay what others can pay. So as you think about your organization, whether you're thinking about cyber, whether you're thinking about attracting anybody, you got to think about it. And I would bet you many of this room who are in uniform here because you were attracted to that sense of mission. So don't forget that point. Okay, so we're going to talk about the VetSuccess program, and I am very technically challenged, so bear with me. The first thing I want to do is show you a short video. See if I can do this. And if I can't, you can make fun of me. Actually, if I can, you can still make fun of me.
I would describe the talent shortage in the cybersecurity world as being quite dire.
Ever since the problems of cybersecurity became visible to companies, they discovered that the people that they had hired in cybersecurity didn't have the technical skills to figure out what happened after an attack and clean them up.
We don't have the talent that we need to address this. It's putting the good guys in a heck of a position.
The Air Force had a solution. They were declining in size. Thousands of IT people were leaving and going to work.
I had some cyber defense experience before looking at sensors.
The problem was those people didn't have deep technical IT skills. Someone has to teach you how to do digital forensics, intrusion detection analysis, incident handling.
So that's why we created VetSuccess, to help us help vets be able to transition into the field and to help employers get some talent that they needed to begin to address this huge imbalance.
First week on the job, I was able to apply the stuff from the courses. They're teaching you skills. Some of my friends that are transitioning, they received the notification as well. They reached out to me and was like, hey, what was your experience like? I was like, go ahead and do it. Hands down, do it.
I start telling them about the program, and their eyes light up, and they get excited. Having our transition assistance programs involved with programs like this is a great opportunity for our veterans.
VetSuccess is important to us because it provides, I believe, a new source of talent to help us fill this gap.
Just at the beginning of World War II, the U.S. didn't have enough pilots to win that war. We ramped up very fast during World War II with flight schools at 22 sites around the country. The cyber academies are the equivalent for cyber defense.
It changed my life. That's the thing that I can honestly say. I've been provided a skill set that will carry me.
These guys are prepared to go and fill these positions. It's kind of the promise that was made to them when they came into the service, that they will be able to find a job.
The Air Force provided a lot for me and my family, so being able to get a job and then to continue to support the DoD, it means a lot to me.
So there are two people in that video that I want to give a shout out to. Let me put that back on slide view if I can get this. No, this laptop doesn't have a push button. There we go. Alan Paller, our founder, and Chip Campbell from the Air Force, Master Sergeant Campbell, were two of the people who were deeply involved in this from the very inception of the concept. I've been privileged to pick up their idea and help move it along with three of my other colleagues who work really hard across cyber talent, but most of our time is spent with VetSuccess, and that's Max Shufton, Tiffany Keller, and Sonny Sandelius. So if you're interested in the program, if you touch the program, you're going to run into one of the four of us, and they work really hard at this, and I'm very honored to be a part of it. So how does it work? So we have an assessment tool. I'm going to show you a couple slides a little bit later about the assessment tool. Well, the assessment tool is called Cyber Talent Enhanced. It was designed by the same guys, the same PhD psychometricians who do our work on all the GX certifications. So these guys designed this assessment tool. The original version of the assessment tool was designed at the request of the Army to try to think about who would go into cyber programs that we provide training. Our friend Mark Baggett in the back of the room, who I should have introduced, who does a lot of that training for us. Actually, you got introduced at the very beginning, Mark. You were the first guy up. I was still in the bathroom. I'm sorry. I'm on top of my game today. Anyway, so we first started working with there. We've used it in a number of applications. Right now, our data to date tells us that it has between a 70 and an 80% correlation with the ability to successfully pass a GX certification. Now, that's a mouthful. Let me say it again. It has between a 70 and an 80% correlation with predicting the ability to pass a GX certification. I have been around testing and certification since before most of you in this room were born. And that is the highest correlation I have ever seen. There may be a higher one out there somewhere, but I can tell you back 30 years ago when we were trying to figure out who should go into our skilled trades programs, and we used things like the Bennett Mechanical Aptitude Test, it had about a 60% correlation, which is better than random, sometimes 65. So when you start approaching an 80% correlation, you got a real winner in terms of determining this. So the first step is interested vets take online this exam that I just described, and I'll show you in more detail in a couple slides exactly how it works, but that's step one. We look at people and their scores on this. Oh, I should also say for this audience, you'd probably be interested, to date, anybody who has scored at least in the 60th percentile, at least in our programs that we do internally with the Army and the Air Force and the other alphabet agencies, to date, we have not had one person who scored 60% or higher fail, not one. So we have a 100% correlation with 60% and higher. That's a real big deal. So the second step is, after the person takes the assessment, they fill out a resume. Interesting, our initial thought about the kinds of backgrounds that we thought would really be a good fit and what turned out to be the kinds of backgrounds, we were much more limited in our thinking. Our first thought was STEM disciplines, for sure. And then inside of that, IT experience, for sure. And we can tell you that the people we put through the program, the people who currently go through the program, a lot of them, more than half, have a STEM discipline of some kind, and a number of them have IT disciplines. But one of the groups, and it was a big surprise to me, one of the groups that we've seen repeatedly in every cohort with really high scores are linguists. And, you know, in some ways, language and math have a pretty and reasoning and parsing skills have a pretty strong correlation. And I see a bunch of you guys nodding your heads. Well, you know, I'm a dumb HR guy. Okay, I didn't know that. So another one, we also did a similar exam with several thousand applicants, not identical but similar, over in our UK operations for a big academy that was for kind of all comers, not just vets, not just women, but all comers in the UK. And they had a number of people, statistically significant number of people who had strong music backgrounds. Again, you know, music and the language and numbers and parsing and reasoning skills. So when we bring people into the program, we love to see an IT or a related background because it helps in getting them employed. Employers are looking for that, but we don't limit it to that. In fact, most recently, we've also decided to open up the program to spouses. And we've had some spouses go through the program as well. So military spouses as well as vets are eligible. The third thing we do after that is we do an interview. For our sponsored academies, which I'll get into in more detail in a minute, the interviews with the prospective employer. For our what we call currently our open academies, and we're thinking about changing the terminology of that. Sonny Sandelius, who I mentioned earlier, is our interviewer, and he's been almost perfect. And what Sonny looks for in his interviews is people who are serious about the work it takes to get into this field and to pass these exams and to be successful. People who have a passing interest and can't express their interest, he tends to kind of put in his maybe pile. People who are really fired up about it and show an attitude, have done a lot of things on their own, maybe on an amateur basis, hopefully good things, are people who kind of go up. And we've really had, up until about a month ago, we had 100% graduation rate and 100% pass rate. We had our first dropout, and it's a long, involved story, and I won't be disrespectful to that person's privacy, but I still think the person could have done it. I think it was motivation, not intellect. So once we do that, then we select the people to go through the program. The people who are selected get all this SANS training 100% free to them in all cases. We look for employers to reimburse us in part on the back end or other people who will be sponsors to help us so we can keep growing it. But that's to the vet or the spouse, it's free. They start with 401, which is our boot camp course, and the associated GX cert, which is GSEC. After they pass that, they take 504 and the associated GX cert with that. And then in our first couple cohorts, we had them go through 503, which is a more advanced course. And what we found is we got a lot of interest to say, well, could I take something else? Because typically the third elective is online, not live. And so we thought about it. We said, yeah. So we actually opened up a number of SANS courses as an elective for the third course. It's in series, not parallel. And for those of you who know basic electricity, what I mean by that is you got to pass the first one before you get to take the second one. And you got to pass the second one before you get the elective. So, and then we match them up with employers. We recently formed 2 arrangements with 2 search firms that are helping us with that. Obviously, for our sponsored academies, it's really easy because the employers already interviewed them. And in fact, Solutionary, you saw Arlen Halstead, who's a wonderful person. Solutionary is a managed security services provider that we work with, and they start our first sponsored academies. They actually hire the vets after they pass their GSEC cert. So they get a job with Solutionary after they take 401 and pass the associated cert, which from a transition point of view is pretty awesome. So when they take the subsequent courses, they're taking them as a Solutionary employee. And Solutionary also puts their own employees side by side in the classes with them. So there's a bonding opportunity to meet your new peers. So we were very blessed and fortunate a couple months ago in May to be honored at a White House event for joining forces for this program. And our folks for Solutionary were with us. And one of the guys from our first cohort was with us who worked for Solutionary. He'd been there 11 months and he already got promoted. So we bought him a beer. We were pretty happy about that. So that's kind of the very basics. Let me give you a little bit more information, and then we'll go into the assessments a little bit. I think we're doing great on time here. Pardon me, I don't have a clock in front of me, so I'm just going to check my Fitbit for time. Yeah, we're doing great. Our first 2 cohorts last year, we had 18 folks who went through it. We've been modifying as we go how we run these cohorts. In our first 2 cohorts, pardon me for SANS nomenclature. I'll try to make this as non-SANSy as I can. But everybody went through what we would call conference. So they went to a big SANS event someplace and took 401 at a big event where we were offering lots of SANS courses. And they did the same with 504. And then our very first cohort went through 503 the same way through conference. Well, you know, there's a cost associated with that of flying those people there, paying the per diems, paying the meals, everything associated with that. So we came up with this idea of community. So we launched an academy earlier this year. People are graduating it from now. Anybody hiring in here, we got a bunch of graduates looking for jobs. Love to talk to you about that later. So we did one at Joint Base Lewis McChord out in SeaTac, and we did one here at Fort Gordon. What's nice about that is they're local. So the people can participate locally. They can go home at night. It doesn't cost SANS the extra money for all the other, accoutrements of travel and everything. And then we put local, if you could call them retail paying community clients side by side with those people through the program. And here we did that in cooperation with Augusta Ware Project and with Augusta University. We just did our second one. So we have another one coming, which is sitting on this piece of paper in front of you this fall. So if any of you are interested, love to have you sign up and participate. So we're kind of morphing from doing things through conference to doing more through community and more through our on-demand modalities, which is nice for people who are trying to finish their day job. We have 18 candidates, all got great jobs, 100% graduation rate. We have another 18 who were hired by Solutionary through their academies. We have 37 who are wrapping up right now. We also have a women's academy, which I'll briefly touch on in a few minutes, which we're very excited about. We have 6 academies on the books for the second half of this year and a number in the discussion phase as well. So we believe that we'll be in a position to be graduating hundreds, maybe not thousands, maybe someday, but hundreds every year through the program. This just happens to be Joe's story. I'll let you take a second and read it. It wasn't Joe's story, but one of Joe's colleagues in the second cohort, I think it was. We have dinner with these guys at the kickoff academies, get to know everybody, and everybody's got a story, right? Everybody in this room's got a story. Every one of these guys has got a story. But one of them, 22 years in the Air Force, was looking at help desk jobs, $45,000 a year, got into the program, went through the program, got a job as a SOC analyst for $92,000 a year. oh, by the way, he has 3 kids in college. And you talk about life-changing. Pretty cool. So let me just touch on these assessments very briefly so you get a sense of it. And I really want to focus in our conversation this morning on Cyber Talent Enhanced. I talked about earlier. We also have 4 assessments that are content assessments. And we find prospective employers like these to sort out which SANS classes to send people to sort out skills of their contractors, or to sort out if people they're interviewing for jobs have the skills they profess to have. Obviously, the best way to test that is with a certification. Obviously, from our perspective, if that's a GX certification, even better, but that's just us. But CTE, I think, is important because it's such a key tool. So 50 questions, as I mentioned earlier. This now is at the bottom where it says hundreds of test takers. That's now thousands. So we've got some pretty good data. And on the other side, the little boxes just gives us a sense of where we think, based on people's scores, they should be. But let me go to this slide, because I think this is kind of gets to the heart of what I wanted to explain. It's 50 questions. 25 of them are basic networking skills, and 25 of them are aptitude. When we look at people who we're bringing into this program or our new women's programs, we really focus on aptitude, particularly for people who might not have any relevant work experience, the linguists that I talked about earlier, folks like that. So we look at that, and we look at those aptitude scores. So that's a real area of focus for us. Sometimes employers, when they're using this as a tool for interviewing, will look at kind of both areas. But for us, it's really all about that aptitude score. So we're really trying to understand what that is. By the way, there's versions of this that are on our website. We update it regularly and make changes to it as we get new data. But anybody wants it, feel free to let us know. And you're welcome to go on the website. Or actually, if anybody wants this version, there's nothing proprietary. You're welcome to it. So what's next? You guys have a piece of paper on you in front of you about the next academy at Fort Gordon. If you're interested, please sign up. You'll encounter Sonny and Tiffany in the process. They're wonderful people, I can tell you that. We have a partner on the West Coast that is expanding with us. Anybody here ever heard of Rally Point 6? Great group, great organization. So we're working with Rally Point 6. They are our partner there, just like Augusta Ware and Augusta University are here. They provide the space. They help us. They also have a lot of good skills for helping people with things like resumes, that sort of thing. So we'll be doing our second academy at JBLM this fall. We just finalized last week, in cooperation with the USO and Rally Point 6, that have a partnership, an academy in Colorado Springs, which we're very excited about. We think that's going to be a great area for us. And we have a partnership with a group called Onward to Opportunity. O2O is a part of the Institute for Veterans and Military Families out of Syracuse University that's been very well funded by a number of groups, but particularly the Howard Schultz Foundation. And O2O works with transitioning vets in a whole bunch of different areas, and we're now their partner for their cyber sort of line of learning, if you will. And we'll be doing an academy with them in San Antonio this fall. We have 2 sponsored academies I already mentioned, and then we have several others that we're in the discussion phases of. So that's where we are for the second half of this year. And let me just touch briefly on the Women's Academy. Our partner here is the National Center for Women in Information Technology out of Colorado Boulder. They have a program. They start with girls as early as middle school called Aspirations in Computing. They do a lot of really cool work, and we're really proud to have them as a partner. We opened up last fall the opportunity to take the assessment. In less than a month, we had 300 applicants. 200 fit our criteria of our initial cohort and took the exam. We selected 100 of them for further interviewing and selected the top 20. We had 1 dropout because of a sad family situation. So we put 19 through. They've already been through 401. 10 or 11 have passed GSEC as of today. The rest will be taking it in the next few weeks, and then they'll go through the same process I described, and then we'll pair them up with employers. And that is basically everything that the slide says is what I just covered. Lastly, I just want to touch, we also do a number of other things in cyber talent. We're here today to talk about VetSuccess, but we also do career fairs. We just had one with, trying to think how many employers. I think a dozen employers. We've had 4,600 people participate to date in that. It's another way that we try to help with this issue. So with that, we got about 15 minutes left. I would be happy to take any and all questions, snide remarks. I'm going to start with you since you raised your hand first. We have, by the way, handheld mics because this is being recorded. So if you're going to ask any questions that you don't want to be recorded, just see me afterwards.
Most of what you've talked about is focused on this program for active duty service members leaving the service. My question is there any consideration for currently serving reserve component service members?
Yeah, so yes, and I'll give you 2 or 3 answers to that. One is some of you who are in reserves may know that the Guard and Reserves are doing a number of programs to do cyber training inside their organizations, and we're working closely with them, starting with the assessment. So that's 1. 2, to date, we have limited a lot of our activities to people who are not currently in the field working in a professional capacity with an employer. Let me go through this carefully because I get a lot of blowback on this, and it's okay. I'm an HR guy. I'm used to blowback. But our logic is if you're currently working for Microsoft, if you work for Microsoft, this is an example, no offense, Microsoft ought to be willing to step up and pay for some of your training. So we're happy to have vets who've already transitioned out, but we'll look closely at what they're doing. And if they score really, really well on the assessment and do really well, and they're working in some field other than cyber, they'll have a pretty good shot at getting in. If they're already currently working in cyber, because remember, the whole point of this is to get more people into the field, we'll strongly encourage them to go take their score back and talk to their employer about maybe their employer will sponsor for them. Because, there's a limit to what we can do, and we really want to concentrate it on those people who might not have another path to get there. So that's how we deal with that. Subject to change, subject to input. I will tell you, for example, that in our first women's cohort, we had women who were within 5 years of having graduated. And if I got one email, I got 8,000 emails from a lot of mid-career career changers. And we were wrong. I'll accept that. So our next cohort, we're lifting that requirement. So we are willing to think and change, but you understand what our mission is and what we're trying to accomplish. Right here.
That was exactly my question, more specifically towards the National Guard.
Yeah. So yes and yes. There you go. Right here. Yes, sir.
Good morning. Good brief, and I appreciate it. So I'm Chief Winter. I'm with the Signal School here. You kind of talked a little bit about, how you keep your curriculum updated, and it's always advanced. Can you tell us a little bit about what your secret sauce is to always keep your training state-of-the-art and the best? I've got another question after this, too.
Okay. No, Mark, you were in the right direction because I can comment on this, but I want to see if Mark wants to comment on this because he's one of our instructors, or Eric might want to comment on this. So you're going to get the rookie comment first, and then if you want a really qualified comment, you can talk to one of the guys who does this for a living every day. So first off, if you know anything about SANS instructors, the path to get to be one of our top instructors is arduous. I was going to say torturous, and then if I say that, somebody will shoot me. So it's a tough hill. We're all about quality at all times. So you don't go get from being a mentor or a community instructor, which is the bottom kind of starting point, to stand up and doing a 4-1 class in front of 200 people at one of our top conferences without a long path to get there. The people are the best of the best in their field. I've met many of them. Usually they talk for more than 1 minute and I'm lost. And they're also, to use a term that Eric and our other colleague Mason Brown are fond of talking about, they're unicorns, meaning they're that rare breed of person who is both technically deeply competent and also can stand up in front of a group of people and teach. I can do the latter. I can't do the former. So I get it. So we have all those things going for us, and we're routinely looking at that course content to see what's going on in the field and change it. I've gotten to be a bit of friends with the guy who does a lot of our 301 teaching, a guy named Keith Palmgren, who's a wonderful person, and I took 301 from him because I felt I should. And he was describing what he personally went through to revise that course and stand up and then be videoed for it for the on-demand. And I can tell you, he wasn't doing that to get rich. He was doing that because it's a labor of love. He wants it to be right. So that's a rookie comment. I'm going to see if Mark and Eric want to add to that, and then you can have your second question.
I don't have a lot to add to that. I think that is all of the SANS instructors are required to be practitioners in the field and practicing this stuff. So you're not getting people who are putting together slides from reading content on the internet to put these things together. You're getting people who are sharing the experiences that they have with their job. If you really want some more details on that, at 12:30 in the SD's room, we have a talk on the making of a SANS instructor, and it's actually hopefully to build some people who are interested in building our instructor workforce. You can get some more details at that 12:30 talk.
Cool.
All right, thanks. Yeah, just within TRADOC and the Army system, the bureaucracy is very challenging on how we can update curriculum. So kudos to the ability for any organization that can be quickly adaptable to get the latest, greatest out there. Now, we've looked at some other opportunities to improve training across our cybersecurity workforce, obviously, and it's using those forces that we have in operational communities that can come in and do it. But hats off to SANS on their ability to it's a challenge within the Army bureaucracy trade to do that. So I appreciate it. Second question is, you had talked a little bit about in this program here that it's open to military spouses, or they are welcomed. Very interesting concept because we're going also for veterans, but totally support it. I think it's great. And you also mentioned a little bit about the aspirations in the community as far as women immersion program. Are there opportunities for this? Is that the same? Are they connected, or are they two separate? And part two of the question is, what about family members who may be interested going the same route, that's being offered for spouses?
Right. So the Women's Academy and the VetSuccess Academy are modeled on the same principles. Obviously, they're structured in the same fashion, but they are two separate programs. There could be crossover. We've had women go through VetSuccess who were vets, who were women. We've had, I don't think in our first 20, because we limited it to people within 5 years of graduation, we had any women who were also vets, but we will over time, I'm quite sure. So they're separate, but we see these things kind of merging over time. We're really, really careful about growth for a couple reasons. The first is quality. The second is instructor availability. And the third is, to the extent employers choose to reimburse us, we get reimbursed and we grow. To the extent that they don't, this is all on SANS's nickel. And so we just have to be thoughtful about how fast and how far we grow that. And we're blessed, and I'll give Eric and Alan and Mason credit to say, the employers will come. That's what they keep telling us. They'll come. They'll get there. And we've had some of that. But we tell everybody when they come into the program, that's our problem. That's not your problem. Your problem is to go through this material, learn it all, graduate, and get an awesome job. And if SANS never gets reimbursed a nickel, that's on us. We'll figure that out. So we're a little careful about just how far we open that up and how fast. So right now, at least, there's no plans to do that for family members, beyond military spouses. Doesn't mean there wouldn't be in the future, again, as we grow. But that's the answer. And then we got one right back here.
So I have several questions. Well, it's a multi-part question.
Okay.
As a woman and a vet and a spouse, which way do I go?
All three.
Okay.
So realistically, though, if you're interested in applying the program, you just apply to VetSuccess. That's the way to go.
Okay.
Because we have more of those cohorts coming up. We've held off on another cohort for the Women's Academy. And the reason we do it relates to this earlier question, my response to it. We don't want to swamp the ship, if I can use a Navy analogy for a second. And right now, we're concerned that if we open up another cohort for the Women's Academy, we'll get several thousand applications, and we're just not ready yet. Again, this is not making excuses. Our department's 4 people. Okay. And so we just want to make sure we have that. There's likely to be sooner, there is. Fort Gordon is coming up this fall.
Yeah,
we probably won't open up another cohort of Women's Academy until early next year. We'll probably do the assessments in November, December.
But didn't you have a time limit on the vet for the VetSuccess from when you've been removed from the military?
No, not necessarily. We've been open on that.
Okay. All right.
We focus first, and we give priority to people who are transitioning, and then we give priority to people who are vets but don't have jobs in the field. And then, again, one more time, for people who are already in the field, already working in the field, we ask them to do it through the employer. Mr. Baggett.
I have a question. So if I'm anticipating that I will be transitioning in 8 months.
Great.
When can I get involved in the program?
Excellent question. Thank you very much. I should have mentioned that. That wasn't a setup. The day after you sign your papers, and let me tell you why. The last thing in the world that we would want to do as SANS is to convince a cyber warrior who was thinking about re-upping to leave to go through this program. That's the last thing on earth that we ever want to do. So we tell people, happy to talk to you, but until you've made up your mind you're leaving, don't apply. After you made up your mind you're leaving, fine. Or if you've already out, as we've talked about a couple different ways and a couple different times, fine. And I have a bunch of those right now. I have somebody right now I've talked to 2 or 3 times who's like, and I keep saying, I don't really want to talk to you because I don't want to influence this. Because if you think you're going to re-up for another 4 years and you can help our country, go help our country, man. So.
Yeah, so if you're a 255 Sierra or 25 Delta and you're thinking about doing this, I am trying to build a force, all right?
Yes, sir.
But I know, hey, the civilian sector is also in dire needs of the talent that we also have. But if you're a 255 Sierra, you can expect an ad. So,
can I just add to that? Because I want to add a point to that. Is really important. Is this program is really designed for people who are not, the 20-year experienced cyber warrior with 6 GX certificates or a SANS master's degree or everything else under the sun. Any of you guys, after you leave, who are looking for employment, please come and see us. We have relationships with 2 search firms. You guys are the most employable people on the face of the earth. And so one of our goals and dreams is that we can create enough of these stories that you can actually use this as a recruiting tool up the road to bring people in. So sometimes we have said, more than once, you're overqualified. You're really not for this program. You're overqualified. But here's 110 different job openings that are out there, and we'll hook you up to all those. So the aim of the program is a certain kind of population in terms of where their skill sets are. There's people who are, really advanced cyber warriors out there who, believe me, are going to have no problems when they decide to leave.
absolutely. Well, kudos to the program. I think it's great for our vets that are coming out. So, and those that are transitioning, perfect for everybody. And I concur. I think some of our folks that are probably got a lot of talent that can just walk into a position right now based on their experience and operational experience. Going back to the other question I had when we talked about family members, and you kind of keyed in also on organizations that are willing to pay. If we know a candidate that's pretty savvy at being a cyber warrior, they're a family member, and they're in an organization that would be willing to pay for them to go to this course, would that be acceptable?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we have people who sponsor seats.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing, too, is if you haven't looked at it lately, for people who are just generally interested in learning more about the field, we have freeware out there. Cyber Aces is a great set of freeware. Go have them play with that, especially if they're a young person who's high school or college and thinking about it. Go play with Cyber Aces. It doesn't cost you a dime.
Absolutely. Aware of it, too. And then the other question is, if there's training available for a family member, would they join those areas that you had mentioned or shown on your one slide? JBLM, Fort Gordon.
Yeah, probably the way we do that through one of the community. But
okay.
I'd have to see what the circumstances are, but most likely. And those are the kind of things, just see us individually afterwards. And Max and Sonny and I were on email all day long answering things like this for individual circumstances. Question way in the back of the room here. And then we'll take one more after that and then let the next group set up. And I'll hang around in the back outside if anybody has any individual questions, but I don't want to cut into Eric's time or whoever's next.
My question is very simple. You broke down where you've got the people, like from the Air Force and all that. Do you have any kind of breakdown on age? And I guess I'm asking that because I'm pushing 50. So is there like an age limit or something like that you had to come into this program, or is it pretty much just what's it been like?
There's no age limit, and we do track all kinds of data because our PhD psychometricians are data nuts, and they love to. We're actually hoping to measure things long term, 5 years out even, to see how people do in the workforce. I can tell you in our first 2 cohorts of 18 people, nearly all of them were retiring from the service and were in their 40s or 50s. Some had shorter, like 4 or 6 year hitches and were in their 30s, but most of them were in their 40s and a few in their 50s. If I had to say the average age of our cohorts to date, it's probably, I don't know, I'm making this up without the data, so shoot me for that, but 45, 46, something like that.
Hey, for the old people in the room, just so that we're not being discriminatory here, we actually ran a competition in San Antonio for the Air Force 4 weeks ago, and the team that had the oldest demographic won. It was all the old guys. I was like, everybody in SANS was pushing me. Come on, you can do it.
So I'm gonna. Sorry, Eric. I'm going to take Eric's story and raise it one notch. One of the highest scorers in the UK of our program over there that we ran last year was a 57-year-old stay-at-home mom who was an amateur hacker, who was really fascinated with this field. And I think, if I remember right, she got a 96. She went through the program and got a great job. And there's a BBC story someplace out there, and I haven't seen it, but somebody told me that. So all ages, all comers, all backgrounds. The relationship between doing well in cyber and having a 4-year degree in computer science is more than random, but not by a lot. And to tell you the truth, the really sad thing, and not to throw darts at OPM or anybody else, but a lot of government organizations in particular put requirements on these jobs. Private sector companies have a little more freedom to act. And we need to really look at that, because we're really limiting ourselves in the kind of people who could do well from being an HR geek, from what I see. So I'm going to take one more question, then we're going to cut it off. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you very, very much. Happy to talk to anybody individually afterwards out back.